When Sarah Chen orchestrates an elaborate scheme to test her boyfriend's loyalty by pretending to be broke, she never expects him to have an even bigger secret of his own. As their carefully crafted deceptions begin to unravel, both must confront the painful truth. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very barriers to finding real love. But in the wreckage of their lies, they might just discover something genuine worth fighting for. Sarah Chen stared at her reflection in the mirror of her luxury penthouse bathroom, carefully smudging drugstore mascara under her eyes to create the illusion of exhaustion. The 500 La Mer moisturizer she normally used was tucked away in a drawer, replaced by a basic drugstore brand. Her designer clothes were hidden in the back of her walk-in closet, swapped for thrift store finds and fast fashion pieces. The 28-year-old tech executive had spent the past week meticulously crafting her new persona. Sarah, the struggling graphic designer, barely making ends meet in the cutthroat world of freelancing. It wasn't that she didn't trust Marcus, her boyfriend of 8 months. But after her last relationship ended with her ex-boyfriend's true gold-digging nature exposed, Sarah needed to be sure. Marcus Thompson was everything she'd ever wanted in a partner: kind, intelligent, ambitious, and genuinely funny. As a high school history teacher, he made a modest salary that he managed carefully. They'd met at a local coffee shop, where Sarah had been working remotely, more to escape the solitude of her penthouse than any need to save on utilities. She'd deliberately left her laptop showing freelance design work rather than the complex financial projections she usually dealt with as CFO of her family's tech company. "You're being ridiculous," her best friend Lily had told her when Sarah shared her plan. "Marcus is clearly crazy about you. Why risk ruining a good thing?" But Sarah couldn't shake the memory of walking in on her ex-boyfriend gleefully bragging to his friends about landing a sugar mama, just 3 months after he'd tearfully proclaimed his undying love. The humiliation still stung, even 2 years later. So here she was, preparing for Phase 2 of her plan. Phase 1 had involved casually mentioning increasingly concerning financial struggles over the past few weeks. A client who hadn't paid, rising rent, mounting credit card debt. Marcus had responded with genuine concern and practical suggestions, never once hinting that she should ask her supposedly middle-class parents for help. Tonight she would tell him she was being evicted. The story was prepared. Her landlord was selling the building, all tenants had 30 days to vacate, and she couldn't afford the massive security deposit required for a new place. She'd rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, practicing the right mix of dignity and desperation. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "On my way, got takeout from that Thai place you love. Hope it helps cheer you up after the tough week you've had." Her stomach clenched with guilt. Was she taking this too far? But then she remembered how her ex had also brought her favorite food when she was down, all while systematically bleeding her bank account dry through elaborate sob stories and temporary loans. The doorbell rang precisely at 7 p.m. Marcus was nothing if not punctual, a trait Sarah secretly adored. She opened the door to find him juggling several bags of food and wearing that warm smile that never failed to make her heart skip a beat. "I got extra spring rolls," he announced, stepping inside and giving her a quick kiss. "And mango sticky rice for dessert. You look tired, babe. Rough day?" Sarah helped him unpack the food, noting that he'd remembered all her favorites. "Yeah, you could say that. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about." Marcus's expression turned serious as he finished arranging the containers on her small dining table. "What's wrong? Is it that client who still hasn't paid?" "No, it's worse." Sarah took a deep breath, hating herself a little for what she was about to do. "I got an eviction notice today. The building's being sold, and we all have to be out by the end of next month." She watched his face carefully as she explained the situation, painting a picture of increasingly desperate finances. To his credit, Marcus listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed in genuine concern. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said when she finished. "That's terrible timing with everything else going on. Have you looked into any temporary housing options? Maybe a sublet?" "Everything in my price range is either in dangerous areas or too far from my clients," she replied, the rehearsed words flowing smoothly. "And I can't afford the security deposits anywhere decent. I've been trying to pick up extra work, but with the market so saturated..." Marcus was quiet for a moment, pushing his pad thai around his plate. "Listen," he said finally, I know we haven't been dating that long, and this might sound crazy, but what if you moved in with me? Sarah's heart stuttered. This wasn't part of the script. Marcus lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment that he decorated with careful attention to detail on a teacher's salary. The rent was reasonable by city standards, but not cheap. "Marcus, I can't," she protested. "You know I can barely make rent now. I couldn't possibly contribute fairly to your place." "We could work something out," he insisted. "You could pay what you can afford, and maybe handle more of the groceries and utilities. Once you get back on your feet, we can reassess. I know it's fast, but I care about you, Sarah. I can't stand the thought of you being out on the street or moving somewhere unsafe." The sincerity in his voice made her want to confess everything right then and there. But she had to be sure. Her ex had also offered to move in together, right after discovering that his own apartment building was being condemned. "I need to think about it," she said softly. "It's a big step." "Of course," Marcus replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "No pressure, just know the offer's there if you need it." They finished dinner talking about lighter subjects, his students' latest antics, a funny incident at the coffee shop where they'd met. But Sarah could see Marcus's mind working, probably already figuring out how to rearrange his budget to accommodate her. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a detailed email from Marcus. He'd researched tenant rights regarding eviction notices, found several reputable housing assistance programs, and compiled a list of legitimate freelance job boards to help her find more stable clients. The care and effort he'd put into helping her made her heart ache. But Phase 3 was already in motion. That afternoon, she called him in tears, claiming her car had broken down on the way to a crucial client meeting. The repair estimate was more than she could possibly afford, and without reliable transportation, she'd lose what few regular clients she had left. Marcus immediately offered to help her look for affordable mechanics and to drive her to meetings until her car was fixed. When she protested that she couldn't impose, he insisted it wasn't an imposition at all. His school was on summer break, and he'd been wanting to catch up on his reading anyway. He could grade papers while waiting for her meetings to end. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus drove her to various client meetings, actually just coffee shops where she pretended to work while he graded papers or planned lessons nearby. He never complained about the inconvenience, never suggested she should have saved money for emergencies, never hinted that her financial troubles were affecting their relationship. One evening, after he'd driven her to 3 different meetings across town, Sarah suggested they grab dinner at a cheap diner she'd spotted. As they settled into a worn vinyl booth, she noticed Marcus seemed distracted, almost nervous. "Everything okay?" she asked, genuine concern creeping into her voice. Had she finally pushed too far? "Actually," Marcus said, fiddling with his paper napkin, "there's something I need to tell you. I haven't been completely honest with you. And with everything you're going through, I can't keep carrying this guilt." Sarah's heart froze. What could he possibly have to confess? Had he seen through her charade? Was he living a double life of his own? Marcus took a deep breath, his face a mixture of shame and determination. "Remember when I told you I was just a regular high school history teacher?" Sarah nodded, suddenly unsure where this was going. "Well, that's technically true, but it's not the whole story. I'm not just a teacher. I write historical romance novels under a pen name, successfully, very successfully." Of all the confessions Sarah had braced herself for, this wasn't even on the list. "I publish under the name M.T. Rivers," he continued, his words coming faster now. "I have 8 books out, all bestsellers in their category on Amazon. I make a lot more than a teacher's salary from the royalties. I love teaching so much I couldn't give it up. And I've had people try to take advantage when they found out about the books, so I started keeping it quiet when dating." Sarah sat there, stunned. M.T. Rivers? The author whose steamy historical romances had been her guilty pleasure reading for the past year? The writer whose latest book was currently sitting on her nightstand? "I should have told you sooner," Marcus was saying, misinterpreting her silence. "Especially when you started having financial troubles. I felt like such a fraud, pretending I couldn't help more. I wanted to offer, but I was afraid you'd think I'd been deliberately deceiving you, or that it would change things between us. But watching you struggle these past few weeks, seeing how hard you're working to stay afloat, I couldn't keep lying." The irony of the situation hit Sarah like a tidal wave. Here she was, testing his character with an elaborate deception, while he'd been hiding his success out of fear of being used for his money. Exactly the same fear that had driven her to this scheme. "The reason I'm telling you now," Marcus continued, reaching for her hand across the table, "is that I want to help. Really help, not just with rides and research. Let me pay for your car repairs. Let me help you find a new apartment. Or, better yet, move in with me. Not because you have to, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. I know it hasn't been that long, but sometimes you just know, you know?" Sarah stared at their joined hands, her carefully crafted plan crumbling around her. The man she'd been testing for gold-digging tendencies was actually a secret millionaire who'd been hiding his wealth for the exact same reasons she had. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. She opened her mouth, knowing it was time for her own confession, but Marcus wasn't finished. "And there's one more thing," he added, reaching into his messenger bag. "I wasn't planning to do this now, but..." He pulled out a book, his latest book, the one currently on her nightstand, and opened it to the dedication page. "This one came out last month. Read it." With trembling fingers, Sarah took the book and read the dedication. "To the girl at the coffee shop who stole my heart with her quiet determination and brilliant smile, you inspire me every day, even if you don't know it yet. Maybe someday I'll have the courage to tell you that you're the reason I finally believed in the kind of love I write about." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. How had she gotten it so wrong? While she'd been crafting elaborate tests of his character, he'd been pouring his heart into words that would live forever on the pages of a book. The guilt was overwhelming now, threatening to choke her. She had to tell him the truth, all of it. But as she looked up into his hopeful, vulnerable expression, she realized the magnitude of what she'd done. Would he ever forgive her for this deception? Could their relationship survive both of them, hiding such massive parts of themselves? The cheap diner lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across Marcus's face as he waited for her response. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either destroy everything they'd built or become the foundation of something even stronger. "I need to tell you something too," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like glass in her throat, sharp and dangerous. "But not here." Marcus's expression shifted from hopeful to concerned. "Of course, my place or yours?" "Mine," Sarah decided. She needed to be surrounded by the evidence of her deception when she confessed. It seemed only fair. The drive to her apartment was quiet, heavy with unspoken words. Marcus kept glancing at her, clearly worried about what she might have to say. When they finally arrived, Sarah's hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. Inside, she walked straight to her workspace, the carefully crafted scene of struggling freelancer life she'd arranged. "I need to show you something first," she said, moving to the closet she'd been keeping locked. "Sarah, you're scaring me a little," Marcus said, following her. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." She almost laughed at that. His automatic assumption that she needed help rather than suspecting she might be the one in the wrong. It made what she had to do both easier and infinitely harder. Opening the closet, Sarah revealed the designer clothes, the premium accessories, all the trappings of her real life that she'd hidden away. "I'm not who you think I am," she said softly. "I'm not a struggling freelance graphic designer. I'm the CFO of Chen Technologies. My family owns the company. I'm actually worth more than most of your book sales combined, I'd guess." Marcus stood very still, his eyes moving from the closet to her face and back again. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why would you pretend to be struggling?" Sarah sank onto her couch, suddenly exhausted. "Because my last relationship ended when I discovered my boyfriend was only with me for my money. He'd researched me before we met, planned everything. I couldn't go through that again. So when we met at the coffee shop and you assumed I was a freelancer, I just didn't correct you. And then it became this whole thing, and I kept digging myself deeper. The eviction notice, the car troubles," Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "All fake. I was testing you, seeing how you'd react to dating someone who was struggling financially. I wanted to be sure you weren't another gold digger." The words sounded even worse spoken aloud than they had in her head. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was processing something difficult. "So, while I was feeling guilty about hiding my success from you, you were actually running an elaborate scheme to test your character," Sarah finished. "Yes, I know how terrible it sounds. I've been feeling awful about it, especially these past few weeks when you've been so incredibly supportive." To her surprise, Marcus let out a short laugh. "You know what's really funny? I actually thought about doing something similar when I first started dating after my books took off. Setting up a fake profile as just a teacher, seeing how people reacted when they thought I was middle class." Sarah looked up sharply. "Really?" "Really, I didn't go through with it because I thought it would be dishonest." The words weren't accusatory, but Sarah felt them like a slap nonetheless. "But I understand the impulse. When my second book hit the bestseller list, suddenly everyone from high school was reaching out to reconnect. My last girlfriend leaked my real identity to the media for attention. It makes you paranoid." Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of their mutual deceptions. Sarah waited for the other shoe to drop, for anger, for accusations, for the end of everything they'd built. Instead, Marcus sat down beside her on the couch, close but not touching. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "All those times I drove you to client meetings, what were you actually doing?" "Mostly actual work," Sarah admitted. "Just CFO work instead of graphic design, conference calls, financial projections, acquisition planning. A few times I was just reading." "Reading what?" Sarah felt her face heat up. "Your books, actually. I've been a fan of M.T. Rivers for over a year. I had no idea. When you told me at the diner, I almost couldn't believe it." This time, Marcus's laugh was genuine, if slightly incredulous. "So you were secretly reading my books while pretending to be poor while I drove you around, pretending not to be the author of the books you were reading." Put that way, it did sound rather absurd. "I guess we both have trust issues," Sarah said quietly. "I guess we do." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know what this means, don't you?" Sarah tensed, waiting for the judgment to fall. "It means," he continued, "that we're probably perfect for each other. Two successful people so afraid of being used that we'd rather hide our success than risk being honest. At least we came clean before anyone proposed." Sarah's heart stuttered at the casual mention of proposals. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm definitely angry," Marcus said, but his tone was gentle. "What you did was manipulative and dishonest. It's going to take time to rebuild trust. But I also understand why you did it, probably better than most people would. And the fact that you're telling me now, after my confession, but before I actually spent any money trying to help you, that means something." "I was going to tell you tonight anyway," Sarah said. "Even before you told me about the books, watching you rearrange your whole life to help me, seeing how genuinely good you are, I couldn't take it anymore. The guilt was eating me alive." Marcus finally reached for her hand. "Then, I guess the question is, where do we go from here?" Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers. "I'd like to start over, properly this time. No more hiding, no more tests." "Complete honesty from here on out," Marcus agreed. "Though I have to admit, it's going to be weird not having to watch my spending around you anymore." "About that," Sarah said, managing a small smile, "I actually have some thoughts about investment strategies for your royalty earnings, if you're interested. And maybe you could help me edit the financial literacy blog I've been thinking about starting." "See? Perfect for each other." Marcus squeezed her hand. "But first, I think we both have some making up to do. For instance, I believe you owe me about 40 hours of driving time." "And you owe me signed copies of all your books," Sarah countered, "including personalized dedications." "Deal, although—" Marcus's expression turned thoughtful. "You know what might be more interesting? Writing our story. Two successful people hiding their wealth from each other, both afraid to trust. It's got all the elements of a great romance novel." "As long as you change the names to protect the guilty," Sarah said. Then, more seriously, "Do you really think we can move past this? Build something real?" Marcus turned to face her fully. "I think we already have something real. That's why we were both so scared of losing it. Everything else, the money, the careers, the deceptions, that's all just plot complications. The heart of the story is what matters." "And what's that?" "Two people who found each other in a coffee shop, connected over bad jokes and shared interests, and fell in love despite their best efforts not to. Everything else is just details." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the tension of the past months finally begin to ease. "When you put it that way, it sounds almost simple. The best stories usually are, at their core. Speaking of which, he pulled away slightly to look at her. Since we're being honest now, there's something else you should know about that dedication in my latest book. Sarah's breath caught. What about it? I meant every word, even before I knew who you really were, even thinking you were just a struggling freelancer. You were always the one who made me believe in real love. Money or no money, that hasn't changed. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes again, but for an entirely different reason this time. I think, she said carefully, that might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Well, I am a romance novelist, Marcus replied with a hint of his usual humor. Then, more seriously, we have a lot to figure out. Trust to rebuild. Probably some arguments ahead about why exactly we each thought deception was the answer. But I think we might just have the makings of a happily ever after here, if you're willing to try writing it with me. Sarah looked around her apartment, at the evidence of her deception, at the man who had seen through to her heart despite her best efforts to test him, at the future suddenly sprawling out before them with all its complicated, beautiful potential. You know what? She said. I think this might be one story where the truth is better than fiction. Marcus smiled, and in that smile Sarah saw everything she'd been looking for all along: understanding, forgiveness, and the kind of love that could survive even the most elaborate of tests. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could finally stop pretending and just be herself. The late evening light filtered through her windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware that within these walls, two people were slowly, carefully beginning to rebuild something broken into something stronger. And maybe, just maybe, they were writing a new kind of love story, one where the happily ever after came not from perfect honesty, but from learning to trust again after dishonesty, from choosing to be vulnerable even when it scared them, from finding in each other the very thing they'd been hiding themselves to protect. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Marcus began the delicate dance of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of truth. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when old fears would surface, when trust felt as fragile as spun glass. But they were committed to making it work, one honest conversation at a time. Their first real test came when Marcus's publisher announced a major promotional tour for his upcoming book. He'd always done virtual events before, protecting his privacy, but his growing success made in-person appearances inevitable. Come with me, he said one evening, as they sat in his now familiar apartment. Not just as my girlfriend, but as my financial advisor. Help me figure out how to manage all this. And Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing quarterly reports. Are you sure? Going public together is a big step. I'm sure. Besides, he added with a wry smile, it might be good for both our reputations. The romance novelist and the CFO, it'll show people we're more than our careers. The tour planning became their project, a way to blend their skills and rebuild trust. Sarah applied her business acumen to help Marcus negotiate better contracts and invest his earnings wisely, while he helped her learn to be more open about her success without fear of judgment. But private challenges remained. One morning, Sarah found Marcus staring at her designer handbag with an unreadable expression. What's wrong? She asked, though she suspected she knew. Sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, he admitted. Like maybe this is another test, or I'm going to wake up and find out this version of you isn't real either. His honesty hurt, but Sarah appreciated it. I know, sometimes when you're being especially generous or kind, I still catch myself looking for ulterior motives. Old habits die hard. How do we fix that? Maybe we don't fix it all at once, Sarah suggested. Maybe we just acknowledge it when it happens and choose to trust anyway. This new philosophy was tested when Sarah's parents announced their annual charity gala. In previous years, she'd attended alone or with carefully vetted business associates. Taking Marcus would mean introducing him to her entire social circle, exposing both their relationship and his identity to potential scrutiny. We don't have to go, she said when she told him about the invitation. I know how much you value your privacy. Marcus was quiet for a moment, fingering the well-worn leather of his favorite notebook, the one where he jotted down ideas for his stories. You know what I've realized? All my books are about people being brave enough to love, despite their fears. Maybe it's time I took my own advice. The night of the gala arrived, bringing with it all the glamour and pressure of high society. Sarah watched nervously as Marcus charmed her parents, handled probing questions from business associates with grace, and never once made her feel like she needed to apologize for her world. It was during a quiet moment on the balcony, away from the crowd, that Marcus surprised her again. "I think I finally understand why you did it," he said, looking out over the city lights. "The test, I mean. This world you live in, it's beautiful, but it's like walking through a minefield of hidden agendas." Sarah leaned against the railing beside him. "Does it scare you?" "Less than you'd think, because I realized something tonight, watching you in there. You're exactly the same person I fell in love with in that coffee shop. The money, the position, they're part of you, but they're not all of you. Just like writing steamy historical romances is part of you, but not all of you." "Exactly." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Which is why I want to ask you something important." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Marcus?" "No, not that question. Not yet." He smiled. "Though maybe someday. What I want to ask is, will you help me write my next book?" Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. "What?" "Not the whole thing," he clarified quickly. "But there's this story I've been thinking about trust and masks and learning to love someone for who they really are, not who you think they are. Sound familiar? You want to write our story? A version of it, changed enough to protect our privacy, but keeping the heart of it. The truth about how hard it is to trust, how easy it is to hide, and how love sometimes means taking off all our masks and hoping the other person still likes what they see." Sarah thought about their journey, the deceptions, the revelations, the careful rebuilding of trust. Won't people think it's unrealistic? Two people accidentally hiding their wealth from each other? "Sometimes the most unrealistic stories are the truest ones," Marcus replied. "Besides, it's not really about the money. It's about learning to be vulnerable, learning to trust again after being hurt. That's something everyone can relate to." Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him. In his rented tuxedo, surrounded by all the trappings of her world, he was still fundamentally the same man who had offered to drive her to client meetings and research tenant rights on her behalf. The man who had chosen to help rather than judge, to understand rather than condemn. "Okay," she said, "but on one condition." "Name it." "We write it together. My business experience, your storytelling skills, a true collaboration." Marcus's smile lit up his entire face. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they stood there on the balcony, the sounds of the gala floating out from behind them, Sarah realized they were writing more than just a book. They were writing their own story, one where past mistakes didn't define the future, where trust was a choice made every day, where love meant accepting all parts of a person, even the parts they tried to hide. The city stretched out before them, a tapestry of lights and shadows, possibilities and challenges. Their story was far from over, but perhaps that was the best part. They were no longer hiding, no longer testing, no longer afraid of what might be revealed. They were simply two people, choosing each other, day after day, mask by mask, truth by truth. The collaboration on Marcus's new book became their bridge to deeper understanding. They spent evenings in his apartment or her penthouse, debating character motivations and plot points, each bringing their unique perspective to the story. Sarah's business insights added depth to the financial deceptions, while Marcus's emotional intelligence helped articulate the fears and hopes driving their characters. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. One evening, while reviewing a particularly emotional scene, Sarah found herself struggling with the dialogue. "It doesn't feel real," she said, pushing away from her laptop. "The heroine's apology. It feels too neat, too practiced." Marcus looked up from his notes. "Maybe because you're still carrying guilt about your own apology." The observation hit close to home. Despite their progress, there were still moments when Sarah caught herself overcompensating, trying too hard to prove she could be trusted. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted, "for you to wake up one day and decide you can't forgive what I did." Marcus set aside his notebook and moved to sit beside her. "You know what I think? I think forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's a choice we make every day, just like trust." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Sarah's mother, announcing an unexpected twist. The local business journal was planning a feature on young executives, and they wanted Sarah for the cover story. "They're particularly interested in your personal life," her mother said. Apparently, someone at the gala mentioned your relationship with a mysterious writer. Sarah's heart raced as she relayed the information to Marcus. This would mean exposure not just for her, but for him as well. His carefully guarded privacy as MT Rivers would be compromised. "We knew this might happen eventually," he said, surprisingly calm. "Question is, are we ready?" The decision to do the interview together became another turning point. They agreed to control the narrative, to tell their story on their terms. But as they prepared for the interview, old insecurities surfaced in unexpected ways. "What if people think I'm just using you for book material?" Marcus worried one night. "What if they think I was manipulative and cruel?" Sarah countered. "What if they're right?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Finally, Sarah said, "Maybe they are, a little bit. Maybe we both did manipulative things. But isn't the point that we're trying to be better?" The interview was scheduled for a sunny Tuesday morning at Sarah's office. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Chen, no relation, seemed particularly interested in the dual nature of their success. "So, you both essentially lived double lives?" she asked, her recorder running. "We lived cautiously," Marcus corrected. "In a world where success often attracts the wrong kind of attention, we both chose protection over transparency. Until we realized," Sarah added, "that protecting ourselves was keeping us from something more valuable, real connection." As they shared their story, carefully edited but fundamentally true, Sarah watched Rebecca's expression shift from skepticism to genuine interest. The journalist seemed particularly struck by their current project, co-writing a novel inspired by their experience. "Isn't it risky?" Rebecca asked, "exposing your personal life this way?" Marcus reached for Sarah's hand before answering. "Everything worthwhile involves some risk. The trick is figuring out which risks are worth taking." After the interview, as they walked through the busy streets of the financial district, Sarah felt a weight lifting. "That wasn't so bad," she said. "No, it wasn't." Marcus paused at a street corner. "You know what I realized in there? We've spent so much time worried about people judging our past mistakes that we've almost missed how far we've come." The observation sparked something in Sarah's mind, a missing piece in their novel's structure. That's it. That's what our story needs. It's not just about the deception and revelation. It's about what happens after, about actively choosing to build something better. Their evening was spent reworking the novel's later chapters, infusing them with the hard-won wisdom of their own journey. As they wrote, Sarah found herself drawing parallels between their characters' growth and their own. The article came out a month later, coinciding with the announcement of Marcus's new book deal. The response was overwhelming. Messages from other successful people who'd struggled with trust, from couples who would overcome similar challenges, from readers eager to see how their real-life experience would translate to fiction. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the one whose betrayal had sparked her trust issues, sent a brief email. "I saw the article. I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong, but it looks like it led you somewhere better. Sometimes our worst mistakes show us what we really deserve." Sarah showed the email to Marcus that evening as they sat in her penthouse, now comfortably filled with both their belongings. His books shared shelf space with her financial reports, his laptop open to their novel's latest draft next to her market analyses. "How do you feel about it?" he asked after reading it. "Grateful, oddly enough," she replied. "Not for what he did, but for where it led. If he hadn't betrayed me, I might never have been so cautious with my heart. And if I hadn't been so cautious, we might never have found each other," Marcus finished. Or at least, not in a way that mattered this much. As they returned to their writing, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. Their story wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still traces of old fears. But perhaps that was what made it real. Like the novel they were writing together, it was a story about flawed people choosing to be better, choosing to trust despite their scars, choosing to build something genuine from the ashes of their mistakes. Winter arrived, bringing with it a fresh set of challenges and opportunities. Their novel was nearing completion, each chapter a careful blend of fiction and thinly veiled truth. The process had been therapeutic, forcing them to examine their actions from every angle, to understand not just their own motivations, but each other's as well. One snowy evening, as they sat reviewing the climactic chapter in Sarah's penthouse, Marcus received an unexpected email from his publisher. "They want to fast-track the release," he said, looking up from his phone with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "They think the publicity from the article has created the perfect marketing opportunity." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "How fast is fast track?" 3 months. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as both nervous and thoughtful. They want to capitalize on the buzz while it's still fresh. The accelerated timeline meant more pressure, more public appearances, more scrutiny of their relationship. But it also meant something else, something neither of them had fully confronted until now. "Marcus," Sarah said slowly, "if we publish this story, even fictionalized, everyone will know, not just about us being together, but about the testing, the deception, everything." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the snow falling past her floor-to-ceiling windows. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." "How do you figure?" "Because it's not just our story anymore. Since the article came out, I've received dozens of messages from other successful people struggling with the same trust issues. People who've been burned, who are afraid to be vulnerable, who don't know how to let someone in." Sarah thought about her own inbox, filled with similar messages from young executives and entrepreneurs. We could help them, she realized. Show them it's possible to move past the fear. Exactly, but only if we're completely honest about how hard it was, about the mistakes we made along the way. The conversation was interrupted by a call from Sarah's father. The board was considering expansion into new markets, and they wanted her to lead the initiative. It would mean more responsibility, more visibility, more public scrutiny. After she hung up, Marcus asked, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about parallel tracks," she said thoughtfully. "About how we're both facing these huge professional steps at the same time. You with the book, me with the expansion, both requiring us to be more public, more vulnerable. Scary timing. Perfect timing, actually." She moved to sit beside him on the couch. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not facing it alone, and I'm not afraid of people knowing who I really am." Marcus pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the city into something soft and new. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them, how their relationship, like the snow-covered landscape, had covered old scars with something fresh and beautiful. "You know what this means, though," Marcus said finally. "If we're really doing this, the book, the expansion, all of it, we need to be ready for the questions, the judgment." "Let them judge," Sarah replied with newfound confidence. "Our mistakes made us who we are, and I like who we are." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of activity. Days were filled with business meetings and writing sessions, nights with deep conversations about their future. They worked on the book's ending, struggling to capture the complex emotions of two people learning to trust again. One evening, after a particularly intense editing session, Marcus closed his laptop with unusual finality. "It's not right," he said. "The ending. It's too neat, too perfect." "What do you mean?" "Real love stories don't end with all the problems solved. They end with people choosing each other despite the unsolved problems." Sarah understood immediately. Their own story was still unfolding, still complicated by moments of doubt, and old fears surfacing at unexpected times. That was the reality they needed to capture. They rewrote the ending that night, infusing it with the messy, beautiful truth of their own experience. The characters, like them, didn't ride off into a perfect sunset. Instead, they chose each other every day, acknowledging their flaws, facing their fears, building something real from the ruins of their defenses. As winter deepened, their lives became increasingly intertwined. Marcus's books appeared on Sarah's shelves, his favorite coffee mug in her kitchen cabinet. Her financial reports shared desk space with his plotting notebooks. They were creating a life together, not because of or in spite of their past deceptions, but because of who they'd become in moving past them. The publicity machine for the book began to roll, bringing with it interview requests and photo shoot schedules. Each public appearance, each shared moment in the spotlight, felt like another brick in the foundation they were building. A foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and chosen trust. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of interviews, Sarah found Marcus on her balcony despite the cold. He was writing in his notebook, snowflakes catching in his hair. "Starting something new?" she asked, joining him. Actually, I was thinking about endings, he replied, showing her the page. It was filled with his familiar scrawl, but instead of story notes, it contained something else entirely. The page contained what looked like wedding vows, carefully crossed out and rewritten multiple times. Sarah's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Marcus. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. I wanted to get the words right first. When it happens, I want it to be perfect. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. You know what I've learned? Perfect is overrated. Real is better. He smiled, tucking the notebook away. Speaking of real, there's something else we need to discuss. The publisher wants us to do a joint book tour. Us? They think our story, the real one, could be as compelling as the book. They want us to speak about trust, about success, about finding love in spite of our fears. Sarah leaned against the balcony railing, considering. A year ago, the idea of exposing herself this way would have terrified her. Now, it felt like an opportunity. What exactly would it involve? 6 cities, panel discussions, signing events, maybe some workshops for young entrepreneurs and aspiring writers. Sharing our experience, but also helping others navigate similar challenges. As they discussed the details, snow continued to fall around them, muffling the city sounds below. Sarah thought about how far they'd come from that first meeting in the coffee shop, from hiding behind carefully constructed facades to standing together in the spotlight. We could make a difference, she said slowly. Help other people avoid our mistakes. Or at least show them there's a way forward after making them. The tour planning became their new project, alongside the final book edits and Sarah's expansion initiative. They worked together to craft their message, to find ways to be honest about their journey without sacrificing the privacy they had fought so hard to maintain. One evening, while reviewing their planned talks, Sarah discovered something unexpected in Marcus's notes. A series of questions he'd jotted down. How do you know when it's real? When is the right time to stop testing and start trusting? Can love survive deception if the intention behind it comes from a place of fear rather than malice? These aren't just for the tour, are they? She asked. Marcus shook his head. They're questions I still ask myself sometimes. Not because I doubt us, but because I want to understand how we got here, how we turned something that should have destroyed us into something stronger. Sarah thought about it. Maybe that's the real story we should be telling, not just about the deception and forgiveness, but about the active choice to build something better. Their discussions began to shape not just their tour talks, but their future plans. They talked about combining their skills in new ways, perhaps a foundation to support young entrepreneurs, or workshops on building authentic relationships in high-pressure environments. The snow was falling harder now, creating a private world on her balcony. Sarah watched Marcus as he gazed out at the city, snowflakes catching in his eyelashes, and felt a surge of certainty. Ask me, she said quietly. He turned to her, confusion clear on his face. Ask you what? The question you've been planning, the one you're writing vows for. Marcus's eyes widened. Sarah, I told you, I want it to be perfect. It already is. She stepped closer to him. We've spent so much time planning and testing and trying to get things exactly right. Maybe sometimes you just have to trust the moment. He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly reached for his notebook. I had a whole speech prepared. Save it for the vows, Sarah said, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Right now, just ask. Marcus took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee on the snow-covered balcony. He opened his mouth to speak, and in that moment, with the city spread out below them and snowflakes swirling around them like stars, Sarah knew that whatever came next would be both perfectly imperfect and exactly right. Sarah Chen, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the snowflakes falling around them. Will you marry me? Not because we've passed each other's tests, not because we've proven ourselves worthy, but because we choose each other, flaws and all, every single day. Sarah felt her heart expand with a joy so pure it almost hurt. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. The ring he pulled from his pocket wasn't the ostentatious diamond her status might have suggested, nor was it a modest teacher's salary purchase. It was an elegant vintage piece with a story behind it. His grandmother's ring, reset with stones from her family's collection. A perfect blend of their worlds, just like them. Their engagement announcement coincided with the book's release, creating a media storm that somehow felt less overwhelming than it would have a year ago. They faced it together, sharing their story with honesty and humility, hoping it might help others struggling with similar fears. The book became a bestseller, but not for the reasons they had expected. Readers connected not with the wealth or the deception, but with the underlying message that true love means choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to trust, choosing to forgive, not once, but every day. Their wedding was an intimate affair, despite their families' positions. They wrote their own vows, incorporating lines from their book and their real-life story. Marcus promised to always see beyond Sarah's defenses to her true heart. Sarah promised to trust not just in Marcus's love, but in her own worthiness to receive it. The foundation they started together, combining Sarah's business acumen with Marcus's emotional intelligence, helped other successful individuals navigate the complicated waters of authentic relationships. They called it the Trust Again Foundation, offering mentorship, workshops, and support groups. Years later, on their 5th anniversary, they returned to the coffee shop where they'd first met. The same barista was working there, and she remembered them, the quiet writer and the hard-working freelancer who'd spent so many hours there falling in love. If only she knew, Sarah whispered to Marcus as they settled into their old corner table. She knows the part that matters, he replied. She saw two people finding each other, beyond all the masks and pretenses. Sarah looked around the familiar space, then at the man she'd chosen to build her life with. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The way we started, the lies, the tests. Marcus considered this as he stirred his coffee, still the same simple brew he'd ordered when pretending to live on a teacher's salary. I regret that we felt we had to hide, he said finally. But I don't regret where it led us. Sometimes the longest road is the one that takes you exactly where you need to be. As they sat there, sharing coffee and memories, Sarah realized they had written more than just a love story. They had written a testament to the power of second chances, to the possibility of building trust from the ashes of deception, to the beauty of choosing love over fear. Their story wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still old fears that surfaced in quiet hours. But they faced them together now, with honesty and understanding. They had learned that true love wasn't about passing tests or proving worth. It was about finding someone who would help you become your best self, who would stand beside you as you grew, who would choose you again and again, even knowing your deepest flaws. And in the end, that was the greatest test of all. Not the ones they had devised to protect their hearts, but the daily choice to remain open, to stay vulnerable, to love without guarantees. It was a test they passed together, every single day, in all the small moments that made up their shared life. As snow began to fall outside the coffee shop windows, Sarah reached for Marcus's hand across the table. In that touch was everything they had built together: trust, understanding, forgiveness, and a love that had grown stronger for having been tested. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing to be better together. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all.